The elevator doors opened on the 31st floor at 7:43 in the morning. A man stepped out. He wore pale green scrubs, not fresh ones, the kind that had been washed so many times the color had faded to something closer to sage, closer to gray. A drawstring pulled loose at the left hip. The fabric above the knee carried a faint crease from long sitting, the kind that belongs to a man who had not slept in a position that could be called comfortable. He carried a single bag, black nylon, one shoulder strap. The zipper was open 2 inches at the top, and from inside it the corner of a child's drawing was visible. Crayon, orange and yellow, something that might have been a sun or might have been a flower. It was hard to tell. He did not look around. He walked the corridor with his head level, his hands quiet at his sides, his shoes, plain white sneakers, the laces a little gray, making almost no sound on the polished floor. He had the gait of a man who knew exactly where he was going. He had the face of a man who had been awake for 31 hours. At the end of the corridor, a woman in a charcoal blazer was already watching him. Her assistant stood 1 step behind her, holding a tablet, the screen facing down. The woman's jaw was set. Her eyes moved from the scrubs to the sneakers to the bag. She said nothing for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Security." His name was Daniel Avery. He was 44 years old. He had worked as a facilities coordinator on the 27th through 31st floors of the Vantage Health Systems corporate tower for 11 months. His role, as stated in the internal HR directory, was Facilities Coordinator II General Operations. His badge was white with a blue stripe, which meant non-clinical, non-executive, and non-essential to the chain of command that began at the 32nd floor and ended at Catherine Holt's corner office on the 34th. What the HR directory did not say was that Daniel Avery had, for 17 years before that badge, been a cardiothoracic surgeon. What it also did not say, what almost no one in the building knew, was why he wasn't anymore. He arrived each morning at 7:30. He left each evening at 5:15, unless something in the building needed attention, in which case he stayed until the thing was fixed and not a moment longer. He kept a maintenance log in a small spiral notebook, blue ink only, his handwriting compressed, and even the kind of handwriting that had once annotated surgical diagrams. He had never missed a day. His desk sat in a narrow room on the 28th floor between the server closet and the utility shaft. The room had no window. He had placed a single photograph on the left corner of his desk. A girl, approximately 6 years old, with 2 crooked pigtails and a gap where her 2 front teeth should have been. She was laughing at something off camera. Her eyes were the same shape as his. Her name was Lily. She was 8 years old now. The photograph was 2 years behind. He had not replaced it. The building he maintained was a 34-story tower of glass and poured concrete in the West Shore district, the kind of building that read differently depending on what floor you were on. Below the 20th, it was administrative, open-plan offices, the smell of toner and cold coffee, the percussion of keyboards. Between 27 and 31, it was operational, the floors where Vantage Health Systems managed the administrative side of 6 regional hospitals and a network of 42 outpatient clinics. Above 32, it was executive, a carpet instead of tile, art on the walls, the quiet that wealth buys. Daniel moved between all of it. He was the man people called when the HVAC unit on the 29th floor made a noise that kept the accounting team from concentrating. He was the man who replaced the flickering fluorescent tube in the corridor outside the legal department before anyone filed a formal complaint. He was the man who, without being asked, had reprogrammed the water pressure in the 31st floor washrooms because it had been running 2 psi below the building code standard, and he had noticed it while performing a routine check. No one had asked him to check the water pressure. It was just the way he did things. The other facilities staff liked him, not in the loud way, not in the way of shared lunches and group chats and running jokes. In the quieter way, they left him the difficult calls without discussing it because he was the one who handled them without complaint. Marcus, the overnight security coordinator, called him Doc sometimes as a joke because Daniel had once correctly identified that the rash on Marcus's forearm was contact dermatitis from the new cleaning product the building had switched to in April. Daniel had said, "Try an antihistamine cream. Stop using the blue bottles," and he had been right, and Marcus had not forgotten it. Daniel had smiled at the nickname once. After that, he did not respond to it either way. His mornings followed a pattern. He arrived, he checked the overnight log. He made one pass of his floors, not a rushed pass, not a performing for an audience pass, but a real one, his eyes moving over the seals on the fire doors and the status lights on the emergency panels and the small things other people stepped over without seeing. Then he sat at his desk with a coffee, black, from the machine in the staff break room, the one that no one from above the 20th floor ever used, and he read through the day's scheduled maintenance requests. On the mornings when the request list was short, he worked on a notebook that lived in the locked bottom drawer of his desk, not the maintenance log, a different one, larger. The pages were covered in a different kind of notation, anatomical, precise, with small marginal references to journal articles whose titles he wrote in abbreviated shorthand. He had been working on something in that notebook for 9 months. He told no one what it was. At 4:45 each afternoon, he left the building and drove 11 minutes to the Orchard Hill Primary School, where he parked in the same spot in the pickup lane and waited for a small girl with 2 crooked pigtails, now a little taller, now with her front teeth grown back in, to come through the double doors. Lily. She always ran the last 20 feet to the car. She always climbed in talking. She always had something to show him, a drawing, a spelling test, a story she had written about a horse that could speak 3 languages. He listened to all of it with the same attention he had once given to intraoperative imaging. On Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Lily attended a session at the Millbrook Pediatric Neurology Center. Daniel sat in the waiting room with his maintenance notebook in one hand and his other hand resting palm up on the empty seat beside him. He did not read during those hours. He sat. When she came out, he held her hand to the car. They did not talk about the sessions, they talked about dinner. The scrubs were not an accident. They were not a statement. They were the simple consequence of a Thursday night that had started at 11:40 p.m., with a call from Millbrook Pediatrics saying that Lily's EEG had flagged an irregularity that required a follow-up sedated MRI, and that the earliest available slot was 5:30 the following morning, and would he be able to bring her in? He had said yes before the sentence was finished. He had driven her there in the dark. He had sat in a different waiting room, harder chairs, fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic underneath something floral while they prepared her. She had asked him to hold her hand until she went under, and he had, and his grip had been perfectly steady and his face had shown nothing that would worry her. And when she was gone behind the doors, he had sat back down in the hard chair and stared at the wall for 6 minutes without moving. He had not had time to go home and change. He had driven directly from the hospital to the Vantage Tower. He had parked in his usual spot. He had taken his bag, the black nylon one with the crayon drawing sticking out of the top, and he had ridden the elevator to the 31st floor to check a ventilation unit that had been logged as making an intermittent grinding sound. The elevator doors opened at 7:43. Catherine Holt was already in the corridor. Catherine Holt was 41 years old, and she ran Vantage Health Systems the way a person runs something when they have spent 15 years being told they are not ready and have decided to spend the next 15 years proving otherwise. She had dark hair that she wore pulled back. She had a way of standing that was not aggressive, but that left no room for ambiguity. She had a reputation among her executive team, among the board, among the healthcare trade press that ran profiles of her every 18 months for being precise, demanding, and, as more than one piece had put it, unusually attentive to the image Vantage projects to the world. That last phrase was the polished version. The unpolished version lived in the corners of the 27th floor open plan, in the conversations that stopped when the elevator dinged and the charcoal blazer appeared. She was not cruel. That was the important thing to understand. She was not the kind of person who enjoyed difficulty. She had simply over 15 years acquired a very specific idea of what a well-run organization looked like, and that idea included with considerable emphasis the appearance of its people, particularly on the floors closest to the executive level, particularly in the corridors where clients and board members occasionally passed. She had a phrase she used in leadership reviews: "We represent something larger than ourselves." She meant it. The morning Daniel stepped off the elevator, Catherine Holt had been in the building for 40 minutes. She had been on the 31st floor because the head of network operations, a man named Gregory Shale, had called her assistant at 6:50 a.m. with a concern he categorized as sensitive. She had come down personally, which was not her usual practice and which spoke to the nature of the sensitivity. What Gregory Shale had told her assistant, and what her assistant had relayed, was that there had been a complaint. Not from Shale himself. Shale was careful never to be the named source of a complaint. The complaint had come from someone in the executive visitor suite, and it concerned the general presentation and professionalism of the facilities team, and it included a specific reference to an individual sometimes observed on upper floors in non-professional attire. The visitor suite was booked that week for a delegation from the Meridian Healthcare Group, a potential acquisition partner whose buy-in over the next 60 days was worth approximately $230 million. Catherine had come down to see for herself. She had been standing in the corridor for 9 minutes when the elevator doors opened. She did not speak immediately. She watched Daniel walk toward her unhurried head level, the faded scrubs, the white sneakers, the black bag with the child's drawing, and something moved through her that she would not have been able to name in the moment. It was not quite disgust. It was closer to certainty. The certainty that this was exactly the problem she had come down to address, and that addressing it quickly would demonstrate exactly the kind of command she had built her reputation on. She said security. Her assistant, a young woman named Priya Chandra, made the call. 2 officers arrived from the lobby in under 4 minutes. Daniel had stopped walking when Catherine spoke. He stood in the middle of the corridor, bag at his side, and watched her approach. He did not speak. His face was still. Catherine said, "You're in a client-facing corridor in, what is that? Hospital scrubs, can you explain that?" He said, "I had a medical appointment this morning." "For yourself?" A pause, 1 second, "No." "So you came to work in," she gestured once at his clothing, "this." "My daughter was at the neurology center at 5:30. I came here directly." There was a silence. Priya Chandra looked down at her tablet. Catherine said, "I understand you may have had a personal situation, but I need you to understand that this floor is currently hosting a delegation from Meridian Healthcare Group and the image standards for this building." "I understand." His voice was level, not conciliatory, not resistant, simply level, the way a report is level. "I'll go home and change." "That's not sufficient." She said it before she finished deciding to. "You've been spoken to." She glanced at Priya. Priya's face did not confirm this. She continued anyway. "This isn't the first time there have been concerns about the presentation of the facilities team. This was not accurate. It was the first time anyone had raised anything specific about Daniel." He said nothing. She said, "I'm going to need you to collect your things from your workstation. HR will be in contact today about the formal process." He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. His eyes were very calm. He said, "All right." He turned and walked back to the elevator. He did not look back. The HR process took 40 minutes. A woman named Carol from HR reviewed his file. His record was spotless. 11 months, no complaints, no incidents, 1 commendation, a handwritten note from the Director of Network Operations thanking him for identifying a water infiltration issue in the server room before it reached the equipment. She read the note twice. Then she read the termination request from Catherine Holt's office, which had arrived in her inbox at 8:07 a.m., which was 2 minutes before Daniel arrived at HR and 11 minutes after he had been told to collect his things. She processed it with the careful neutrality of someone who understood that her job was to execute, not evaluate. Daniel received his termination documents in a manila envelope. He signed where indicated. He shook Carol's hand. He took his personal items from his desk, the photograph, the maintenance notebook, and the locked bottom drawer notebook, which he placed in his black nylon bag beside the crayon drawing. He did not take the pen. It was a company pen. He left the building at 8:52 a.m. He drove to a coffee shop 4 blocks away. He ordered a black coffee. He sat at a corner table. He opened the large notebook and worked for 1 hour and 40 minutes without stopping. On the 34th floor, Catherine Holt took a call from the Meridian delegation's lead representative, who confirmed that the morning's meeting had gone extremely well and that they were looking forward to the next stage. She felt the knot between her shoulder blades ease by a small degree. She asked Priya to send flowers to the Meridian offices. Priya noted it. Gregory Shale sent an email at 10:15 a.m. Saw the resolution this morning, appreciate the quick response. The Meridian team seemed very comfortable. GS. She replied, "Thank you for flagging it." She did not think about Daniel again for approximately 19 minutes. At 9:08 a.m., in the executive lobby of Vantage Tower, a man named Robert Holt, 71 years old, tall, silver-haired, wearing a gray suit that had been tailored sometime in the previous decade, and had not quite kept up with the changes the years had made to the body inside it, stepped off the private elevator from the garage. He was Catherine Holt's father. He had co-founded Vantage Health Systems with a partner 30 years ago. He still sat on the board. He came to the building once a week on Fridays for a lunch that his daughter's assistant scheduled at the same restaurant on the same corner without fail. Today was Friday. He crossed the lobby. At 9:11 a.m., he stepped out of the elevator onto the 34th floor. He said good morning to Priya. He walked past the window that looked west over the city. He sat down in the chair outside his daughter's office and picked up a copy of a trade magazine from the side table and began to read. At 9:22 a.m., Priya looked up from her desk. Robert Holt was no longer reading. He was sitting very still with the magazine open on his lap, and his face had gone the color of old paper, and his right hand was pressing against the left side of his chest. Priya said, "Mr. Holt." He did not answer. She reached for the phone. At 9:27 a.m., 2 paramedics arrived via the lobby with a gurney. At 9:28 a.m., Catherine Holt came out of her office and saw her father on the gurney with an oxygen mask over his face and leads attached to his chest, and the readout of a portable monitor making a shape that meant something wrong was happening inside him. The senior paramedic said, "We need to move. Does this building have an AED?" The building did. It was on the 29th floor in a cabinet beside the fire hose. They did not wait for it. The ambulance reached Westshore General in 4 minutes. Catherine followed in Priya's car. In the emergency receiving area, a physician met her. He said, "Your father is being assessed. The initial presentation suggests an acute cardiac event. We're running imaging now." She said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means we need more information before we can tell you anything definitive." She sat in the waiting room. She had been sitting for 11 minutes when Dr. Ellison, the head of the cardiothoracic surgery unit, walked out and said, "Ms. Holt, I want to be straightforward with you. Your father's imaging is showing a type aortic dissection. It's a surgical emergency." She did not move for 2 seconds. Then she said, "Tell me exactly what that means." He told her. He used careful words. He used the word serious 3 times and the word complex twice and the phrase one of the most technically demanding procedures in cardiac surgery once. He said, "We have a skilled team, but I want you to understand the gravity of what we're discussing." She said, "What is his chance of survival?" Dr. Ellison said, "With surgery we have a realistic path. Without it we don't." She said, "Who is your best surgeon?" He said, "Our attending cardiothoracic surgeon is Dr. Patricia Moore. She's one of the best in the region." A pause. "One of the best?" "Yes." She did not say the next thing immediately. She sat with it for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, she understood something she was not prepared to understand. 3 hours earlier, she had fired a man in green scrubs. A man who had come from a neurology center where his daughter had been sedated for an MRI. A man who had said my daughter was at the neurology center at 5:30 and had not said anything else because she had not given him the space to say anything else. A man whose badge had said facilities coordinator but whose hands, she could see them now in the specific way that recall sometimes works, had been very still at his sides, not the stillness of someone waiting. The stillness of someone accustomed to keeping them controlled. She said, "Priya." Priya was standing 3 feet away. "Yes." "Pull Daniel Avery's HR file, right now, full file, not the termination summary, everything." Priya pulled it on her phone in the waiting room. The file contained Daniel Avery's application materials, which included a CV that HR had received and processed and flagged as overqualified in a note attached to the original hire request, a note that had been written by Gregory Shale's department. The CV listed Medical degree, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Residency, cardiothoracic surgery, Massachusetts General Hospital. Fellowship, aortic surgery, Cleveland Clinic. Attending surgeon, cardiothoracic surgery, Hargrove University Medical Center, 14 years. Board certified, American Board of Thoracic Surgery. Below the employment history, under a section labeled Reason for Career Change. One line. Family obligations necessitating schedule modification incompatible with surgical practice requirements. Catherine read it. She read the note attached to the file, the one from Gregory Shale's department. It read, "Candidate appears overqualified but has expressed interest in facilities roles specifically. Background check clear, proceeding with hire at coordinator II level." She looked at the word overqualified. She thought about the chair he had been offered, the badge, the windowless room between the server closet and the utility shaft. She thought about Lily. She did not recognize the expression on her own face in the glass of the waiting room window. She called HR. She said, "I need Daniel Avery's contact number right now." Carol from HR said, "Ms. Holt, I should let you know his file was marked closed this morning at." "I know when it was marked closed, I need his number." Carol read it out. Catherine dialed. It rang 4 times. A man's voice said, "Yes." She said, "This is Catherine Holt from Vantage." A pause, 1 beat. "I know who you are." She said, "My father is at Westshore General. They're telling me he has a type A aortic dissection. They have a surgeon, Dr. Moore. They say she's good." Silence. "I read your file an hour ago. I should have read it before She stopped. "I'm calling because I need to know, are you still licensed?" A longer silence. "Yes." "Will you?" The sentence didn't come out the way she intended it. Nothing was coming out the way she intended it. "I'm asking you to consider." "What hospital?" "Westshore General." "I'll be there in 12 minutes. The call ended. Priya was watching her. Catherine said, "Get me the number for the chief of surgery at Westshore General." But before she dialed the chief of surgery, something else had already happened. What Catherine did not know, what she would only learn 3 days later, when Priya brought her a printed folder with a red tabbed edge, was that Gregory Shale had known exactly who Daniel Avery was when he approved the hire. Shale had been on the board of Hargrove University Medical Center 6 years ago. He had been in the room when the Credentials Committee reviewed a complaint not against Daniel, but involving Daniel, filed by a senior surgeon whose surgical schedule Daniel had formally disputed on grounds of patient safety. The complaint had gone nowhere. Daniel had been correct. The senior surgeon had been performing procedures on patients he should have referred. But the dispute had created a fracture, and the fracture had been filed, and Gregory Shale had been in the room and had read the file and had remembered the name. When Shale moved to Vantage 3 years later, and when Daniel Avery applied for a facilities coordinator position, having stepped back from surgery 2 years before, for reasons that had nothing to do with any hospital complaint and everything to do with a daughter with a progressive neurological condition requiring consistent parental presence, Shale had flagged the application personally. He had written the note, overqualified. He had approved the hire anyway. Because a man like Daniel Avery, hired into a maintenance role, was useful in a way that was different from the obvious. Because a man with that background in a position that kept him close to operational data, building systems, utility records, server-adjacent corridors, was a kind of insurance. If questions ever arose about clinical practices in Vantage's hospital network, about billing irregularities in procedure coding, about the gap between reported surgical outcomes and the actual outcomes recorded in Vantage's own data systems, a gap that Gregory Shale knew about because Gregory Shale had helped construct it, then having Daniel Avery on staff in a role that made his presence unremarkable was useful. The folder Priya brought Catherine 3 days later contained the evidence. Access logs. Shale had been reviewing a document that contained Avery's personal file on the same morning the anonymous complaint from the visitor suite arrived in Catherine's office. The visitor suite had no bookings until 10 a.m. The complaint was time-stamped 6:47 a.m. The complaint had not come from the Meridian delegation. It had come from Gregory Shale's personal email sent to his own assistant, forwarded upward with the sender metadata stripped. He had manufactured the complaint. He had counted on Catherine to respond exactly as she had. He had understood her, and he had used what he understood. But that was 3 days away. In the waiting room of Westshore General at 9:59 a.m., Catherine Holt had not yet seen the folder. She had only seen the CV. And she was dialing the chief of surgery. Daniel arrived at 9:51 a.m. He had driven from the coffee shop. He was still in the scrubs. He walked into the emergency receiving area. His bag was over one shoulder. His hands were quiet at his sides. A nurse at the front desk looked up. He said, "My name is Daniel Avery. I'm a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon. Who is the attending for the type A dissection that came in at 9:27? The nurse hesitated. A man in a white coat appeared at the internal door. This was Dr. Raymond Chu, chief of surgery at Westshore General. Chu said, "Dr. Avery." They knew each other. They had trained at the same institution a year apart. They had not spoken in 4 years. Chu said, "Come with me." In the corridor outside the cardiac imaging suite, Chu pulled up the scans on a wall-mounted display. He did not explain them. He let Daniel look. Daniel looked for 45 seconds. He said, "Proximal." Chu said, "Yes." Involvement of the coronary ostia. Left main partial. He's been symptomatic how long? Best estimate 40 minutes before arrival, maybe 50. Clock is running. Yes. A pause. Chu said, "Patricia Moore is scrubbing in. She's very good, Daniel." "I know she is." Another pause. Daniel was still looking at the scans. Chu said, "Do you want to see him first?" "No." "Do you want to scrub in alongside?" "What does the family want?" Chu looked at him for a moment, then he said, "The daughter asked for you specifically. She's in the waiting room. She wanted to ask you." "I'll talk to her." The waiting room had cream-colored walls and chairs with padded seats in a blue that had been chosen by someone who understood that certain shades of blue make difficult waiting more bearable. There was a window that faced east. The light through it at this hour was direct and without warmth. Catherine Holt was standing at the window when Daniel came in. She turned. He stopped 3 feet away. She looked at the scrubs. She looked at his face. She said, "Thank you for coming." He said, "Tell me about him." She told him. Age, history, medications, the one cardiac event 6 years ago that had been managed conservatively, the blood pressure readings that had been slightly elevated at his last physical 3 months ago, the fact that he walked 45 minutes every morning without fail, the fact that he had been unusually tired for the past 2 weeks, which she had not thought was anything. Daniel listened. He said, "Is he conscious?" He was when he arrived, less so now. A pause. She said, "I read your file." He said nothing. She said, I need to apologize for what happened this morning, the way it happened. I didn't have full information and I acted on." "Ms. Holt." She stopped. He said, "Your father's surgery is the priority right now." She absorbed this. She nodded once. He said, "I'll scrub in with Dr. Moore. She leads, I assist and advise. That's the structure." "Whatever structure." "That's the structure," he said again, not harder, just the same. "Dr. Moore is the attending. This is her OR." "Understood." He turned to go. She said, "Dr. Avery." He stopped but did not turn. "Lily, is she?" A very small pause. "She's with her grandmother. She's fine." He walked through the door. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Dr. Patricia Moore led. She was 39 years old, technically precise, and had performed 61 aortic repairs in her career. This was her 62nd. Daniel Avery stood across the table from her. He did not speak unless she asked him a direct question. When she asked, he answered in 3 words or fewer. His hands were steady. His eyes were on the field. At 1 hour and 46 minutes, there was a moment. The dissection had extended further than imaging had indicated, and Moore's access to the repair point was complicated by the angle of the ostial involvement. She paused for 2 seconds, not a hesitation, more a recalibration, and then said, without looking up, "What do you see?" Daniel said, "Rotate 9 degrees, open the retractor on the left." She adjusted. The angle opened. She said, "There." He said, "Yes." She repaired it. They did not speak again for 40 minutes. At 2:17 p.m., Robert Holt was moved to cardiac ICU. His vitals were stable. Dr. Moore came to the waiting room. She said, "The surgery was successful. Your father is in the ICU. He'll be sedated for the next several hours. If recovery continues as we hope, he should be extubated by tomorrow morning." Catherine said, "Thank you." Moore said, "Your father had a very complicated dissection. The team performed exceptionally." Catherine said, "Dr. Avery." "Dr. Avery was invaluable." Moore said it plainly, with no performance in it. His expertise made a difference at a critical point. She left. Daniel came to the waiting room 20 minutes later. He had changed out of the surgical gown. He was back in the scrubs, the faded sage green ones, the white sneakers, the black nylon bag. He stood in the doorway. Catherine stood up. She said, "He's going to be all right. Dr. Moore expects a full recovery. The next 24 hours are the critical window, but the repair held well." She crossed her arms over her chest, not defensively, the gesture of someone trying to hold something together from the outside. She said, "I would like you to come back to Vantage." He said nothing. She said, "Not to facilities, obviously not to. I want to talk about what the right role looks like. You clearly have been working on your notebook, the work you've been doing." "How do you know about the notebooks?" A pause. "Your desk was cleared today. The facilities manager brought the personal items to HR for collection. Priya saw the notebook. She described it." He looked at her for 3 seconds. She said, "I haven't opened it. It's in a sealed envelope in HR. I wanted you to know that." Another pause. He said, "There are conditions." She said, "Name them." He said, "I go back to the facilities role, the same one." She blinked. "I don't understand." "The same one for 3 more months." He paused. "I'm close to completing something. The facilities role gives me access to the operational data across your hospital network. I need 3 more months of that access." She said, "What are you working on?" He said, "I've identified a pattern in the billing records for surgical outcomes reporting across 4 of your regional hospitals. The reported complication rates and the actual recorded outcomes in your internal system don't match. Someone has been modifying the data." Silence. He said, "I've been documenting it. I'm 3 months from having a complete evidentiary record." Catherine Holt did not move for a very long time. Then she said, "Gregory Shale." It was not a question. Daniel said, "I can't confirm the source yet, not completely. That's why I need 3 more months." She said, "And then?" "Then I give you the full record, you take it to the board, you make a decision. And your conditions for coming back. I work in my current role with my current access for 3 months. After that, if the documentation is what I believe it is, Vantage conducts an independent clinical audit across all 6 hospital networks. Not internal, external. I'll give you the name of a firm." She said, "And then?" "Then I leave. I'm not asking for a position. I'm not asking for recognition." He stopped. "I need the 3 months." She said, "For the documentation." For Lily, a pause, the first pause that had something underneath it. "She needs a procedure. It's experimental. The pediatric neurology team at Millbrook is developing a protocol. They need a consultant with specific aortic surgical background for part of the methodology. I've been working with them in my off hours." He looked at the window. "The notebook is the protocol framework. It isn't finished." She said nothing. He said, "It needs 3 more months." She said, "You're designing a surgical protocol for your own daughter." He did not answer. She said, "That's why you took the facilities job." The schedule, yes, and the building's server access gave me proximity to Vantage's patient outcome data, which overlaps with Millbrook's research base. He paused. I wasn't looking for what I found, but when I found it, I wasn't going to ignore it. Catherine sat down. She sat very still. Outside the window, the afternoon light had moved to a softer angle, and the city below was the deep gold of a day running toward evening. She said, "Come back Monday." He said, "There's one more condition." She said, "Name it." He said, "The termination this morning happened in a corridor in front of building security and 2 floors of staff who saw the aftermath. I'd like to return the same way, in the corridor, same floor." She understood. She said, "Monday morning, 7:45. He said, "All right." He picked up his bag. He walked out through the waiting room door. The weekend passed. Catherine Holt spent part of Saturday and all of Sunday at the hospital. Her father was extubated Sunday morning at 7:40 a.m., which was earlier than the team had hoped for. His first words, according to the nurse who was present, were to ask about the outcome of a board meeting that had taken place Thursday. He was told there was plenty of time for that. He accepted this with the expression of a man who had learned very recently that there was in fact plenty of time, and that this was not something to be taken lightly. On Saturday afternoon, while her father slept, Catherine called Priya. She said, "I need everything you can find on Gregory Shale's communications for the past 6 weeks. Every email from his accounts, personal and professional if we have server access, every meeting request, every calendar entry." Priya said, "I'll need it to authorize the professional account access." "Tell it it's a compliance review, that's accurate." On Sunday evening, Priya delivered a folder, red tab. Catherine read it for 2 hours. When she finished, she sat at the kitchen table in her apartment and looked at the city through the window for a long time. She thought about the phrase, quick response. She thought about Shale's email, sent at 10:15 that Friday morning. She thought about the fact that she had replied with a 2-word message that had in 6 characters confirmed to him that he had read her correctly. She thought about a man in faded green scrubs, his hands quiet at his sides, standing in a corridor, being told to collect his things. She did not sleep easily. At 7:30 a.m. on Monday, a small gathering had formed on the 31st floor. No one had formally announced anything. These things moved through a building on their own current. Marcus from overnight security was there in his regular clothes because his shift had ended at 6 and he had not gone home. Carol from HR was there, 3 members of the facilities team who worked the floors below. Priya was there, tablet in hand, screen facing down. A few people from the network operations team had come to the corridor entrance, not quite far enough in to be obvious, but close enough that the shape of what they were doing was not ambiguous. At 7:42, the elevator chimed. Daniel Avery stepped out. He was in the scrubs again, the faded ones. It was not a statement. He would change when he reached his desk, the same as he'd intended to do 11 days ago. But he had understood the condition he'd set, and he had honored the spirit of it exactly. The same hallway, the same attire, the same man. He walked to the center of the corridor. Catherine Holt was already there. She was not in the charcoal blazer. She was in a simpler jacket, navy, no lapel pin. Her hair was down. She looked like someone who had not slept well for several nights and had decided to stop performing otherwise. She said, "Dr. Avery." He stopped. She said, 11 days ago in this corridor, I made a decision without adequate information, without appropriate process, and without the basic consideration that every person in this building deserves regardless of their role or attire." She paused. "I was wrong, I'm sorry." The corridor was very quiet. She said, "I'd like you to come back, if you're willing." He said, "Yes." She extended her hand. He shook it. That was all. Marcus made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh and covered his mouth with his fist. One of the facilities team started to say something, and another one nudged him quiet, because there are moments that are better honored by silence, and this was one of them. Daniel picked up his bag and walked to the elevator and pressed 28. The doors closed. Priya looked at Catherine. Catherine said, "I have a 9 o'clock, let's go." Gregory Shale resigned 11 days later. He submitted the resignation on a Thursday afternoon, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities. The resignation letter was 4 sentences long and contained no acknowledgement of anything. Catherine had given him the option of resignation over termination for cause, and he had taken it, which was the transaction she had expected. The board was notified of a formal compliance review. The external audit firm that Daniel had named, Clearwater Clinical Analytics, based in Boston, one of 3 independent firms in the country with the specific expertise for the kind of outcome data review that was needed, was engaged the following week. Catherine did not announce any of this publicly. She had thought about it. She had thought about the press release, the carefully worded statement, the messaging about Vantage's commitment to transparency and accountability. She had thought about whether some portion of that would be honest and whether some portion would be performing honesty for an audience. She decided to do the work first and talk about it after, if there was anything worth saying. 3 months passed in the way that time passes in a building, largely unremarked, event by event, floor by floor. Daniel worked his floors, he checked his overnight logs, he made his morning passes. He sat at his desk in the windowless room and worked on the notebook. He attended 2 Clearwater meetings at Catherine's request, presenting sections of his documented analysis. He answered questions in 3 words or fewer when possible. He gave the Clearwater team the full evidentiary file, organized, dated, cross-referenced, and said, "Whatever you need beyond this, I'll be available." He did not attend the subsequent sessions. On a Tuesday in the 10th week, he was called to the 34th floor. Catherine's office had a window that looked west. In the afternoon, the light came through it at an angle that turned the carpet a different color. She said, "Clearwater has completed their preliminary review. The discrepancies you identified were accurate. 2 of the 4 hospitals have billing irregularities consistent with systemic outcome data modification. The estimated scope is significant." He said, "Good." She said, "You understand what this means for the organization?" "Yes." "It's going to be difficult." "Yes." A pause. She said, "I'd like you to consider a different role when this is done. Clinical advisory, patient outcomes, integrity. We'd be building the function from scratch. I think you'd be well positioned." He said, "That's not what I'm here for." She looked at him. He said, "You have good people, train them, fund the audit properly. Clearwater can help you build the compliance structure." He paused. "You don't need me for that." "We could use." "You have what you need." Another pause. "I appreciate the offer." She said, "What do you need?" He looked at the window, at the late afternoon light on the carpets. He said, "Millbrook's protocol review is next week. Dr. Chen's team has been working on the methodology for 8 months. The protocol is ready for ethics committee submission." She waited. He said, "Lily's scan results came back last week." She said, "And?" "The progression has stabilized." A very small pause, 1 beat. "They think the protocol, if approved, could be a genuine intervention, not a cure, but a real intervention." She said nothing. He said, "That's what I need." He gave his notice the following Friday. He wrote it in the same compressed, even handwriting he used in the maintenance log. 1 paragraph, professional, complete. He signed his name and put it in the internal mail. His last day was a Thursday. He cleared his desk. The photograph, Lily, 2 crooked pigtails, the gap where her front teeth had been, came with him. The maintenance notebook, completed, was left in the top drawer of his desk with a yellow note that said, "For whoever takes the role. The water pressure reading in the 31st floor washrooms should be checked quarterly. DA." He did not say goodbye to the building generally. He said goodbye to the people he'd worked alongside, one at a time, in the matter-of-fact way that meant something precisely because it wasn't dressed up. Marcus walked him to the lobby. At the door, Marcus said, "You know they're going to mess up the overnight log the 2nd week after you're gone." Daniel said, "Probably. You couldn't just leave the notes in slightly simpler language." "The language is fine." Marcus laughed. Daniel held out his hand. Marcus shook it and held it a second longer than necessary. They didn't say anything else. Daniel walked through the lobby doors into the morning. The Clearwater audit published its preliminary findings 7 months later. The report identified systemic billing irregularities across 3 hospital networks, affected outcome records in a combined patient database of over 14,000 records, and noted, in its executive summary, that the initial detection had been made possible by an internal review conducted by a single individual operating in a non-clinical capacity, whose documentation methodology was described by the Clearwater team as among the most meticulous they had encountered in their combined 40 years of healthcare compliance work. The report did not name the individual. He had asked that it not. The Millbrook Pediatric Neurology Center submitted the protocol to the Ethics Committee in the second week of April. Dr. Amy Chen, who led the team, noted in her submission cover letter that the surgical methodology framework had been developed in consultation with a cardiothoracic surgery specialist whose expertise and commitment to this research have been foundational to the protocol's development. She named him. The Ethics Committee approved the protocol 11 weeks later. Phase 1 of the trial was scheduled to begin in September. Lily turned 9 in June. She had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness and a way of explaining things, the plot of a book, the rules of a game, the precise injustice of a situation at school, that proceeded in clear logical steps that arrived at the conclusion before you expected them to. She had been told about the protocol in terms appropriate for a 9-year-old, that the doctors were going to try something new, that it might help her brain work a little better, that her dad had been helping them figure out how. She said, "You helped them make medicine." He said, "I helped them with a part of it." She said, "Which part?" He said, "The hard part." She thought about this. She said, "Is that why you had the job at the building?" He said, "Partly." She said, "Did they know you were a doctor?" A pause. "Some of them did at the end." She looked at him very carefully, in the way she looked at things she was trying to understand completely. She said, "Were you sad, doing a different job?" He thought about the maintenance log, the overnight rounds, the water pressure in the 31st floor washrooms, the fluorescent tube outside the legal department, the windowless room and the black coffee and the large notebook in the locked bottom drawer. He thought about 31 hours without sleep and a corridor and a woman in a charcoal blazer and the word "all right." He said no. She accepted this. She climbed onto the sofa beside him and picked up the book she was reading, something about a horse that solved crimes, which was apparently a series, and read 3 chapters while he worked on a paper that Dr. Chen's team had asked him to co-author for the journal submission. Outside the window, the June evening was long and unhurried. The light stayed until 9. There is a photograph on the wall of the Millbrook Pediatric Neurology Center. It was put there quietly, without ceremony, by Dr. Chen's team in the corridor outside the research lab. It shows the team at work, 8 people around a conference table, papers everywhere, a whiteboard covered in notation that would mean something specific to the people who wrote it. In the lower right corner of the photograph, a man sits at the edge of the table. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at the board. He is writing something in a notebook, black, hardback, well-worn. His expression is focused, concentrated. Below the photograph, a small placard reads, "The Millbrook Pediatric Neurological Intervention Protocol, 2024, in gratitude to all who made this possible." It does not name anyone specifically. He had asked that it not. Daniel Avery never asked to be recognized. He never raised his voice. He never argued. He went about his work with the kind of quiet steadiness that doesn't announce itself, because the people who are most worth recognizing rarely do. He fixed what was broken in a building, in a company, and in a protocol that might one day give a little girl something her father had been building toward, one careful page at a time, for longer than anyone knew. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who believes that quiet work is still real work. We'll see you next time on Bright Tailies.